Thank you, Brooks, for the introduction. And thanks for Bobby for reaching out. It's good to see you again. It's great to be here. It seems like a really, really cool institution, really cool place, very vibrant, very different from a lot of places that I visited. So it's good to be in this energy. And I will say, like, these people that are in this room with you right now are people who are, like, this is your art world. The people that are, like, in your classes with you, people who are part of your cohort, like, pay attention to building bonds with these people because they're going to be with you. You have no idea where you're going to end up. All of you are going to be operating in different ways, using different skills that you learned here. And the future is now. Like, all of you should be working on your projects that are long-term and getting closer to your, like, most ambitious goals. Like, it starts, like, today. It's not something to wait for till you finish till you have your degree. Like, start now. So I'm going to talk. I'm going to actually run through work from, like, my first painting class all the way up until, like, the most recent work. And I have a lot of images. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of them, but I'm going to kind of go in and out of ideas. Also, like, what it means to practice, because I do think the most important thing that you learn when you're in a program is how to practice. You're learning about what you need to give yourself in order to continue to work, how to, like, structure your day, your routine, because all of this, the structure that's here, it all dissipates after you leave, and then you're just left with your own needs and desires. So treat this place like a job, and treat your work like it's, like, everything. Show up to your classes, get as much as you can out of it, but also always be working on your own terms. So I'm just gonna make sure this works here. Okay. There's a short signal on this little thing, which is kind of pointless for a clicker. I always start with this image. This is a painting that I made in my intro to painting class. And this is kind of, usually during your intro to painting classes, as you know, you have assignments, you have things that are more directed, and then you have a moment where you're able to do whatever you want. This is the painting that I made. It was the first painting that I made that I felt like I could call mine. And it's kind of indicative of a lot of things. And someone once told me, like, the things that you're interested in never really go away. And I found that to be really true. You kind of end up making the same, you end up making work around the same kind of central ideas, though the methods and materials might shift. But at its core, I think you'll see a lot of similar ways of approaching information, such as collapse of the figure ground, introduction of history. I knew that was something that was important to me. This is a really important time for me as well, because I remember entering school and starting to understand, like, if I wanted to, like, do this, be a full-time artist, like, live off of my work, and be practicing for that to be, like, my primary focus, that I needed to be in the studio, like, at all times, right? Like, after hours, before hours, like, I was just in the studio rigorously, and I spent all my time thinking about painting, researching painting, going to the library, using all the resources that were around me to just, like, I just wanted to understand what I was engaging in. Okay. I think it's working.
I'll sit up here.
Okay, thank you. This is one of the second paintings that I made, and during this time I was focused a lot on painting people that were around me. These are students that were fellow students of mine at the University of Wisconsin, and this painting, I think, this is like a 6 by 7 foot painting. Also should mention, if you have any questions, like size, medium, anything like, just raise your hand and shout it out, I don't mind. I think I worked on this painting for like 2 semesters. And it kind of kick-started a body of work that I would continue to work on for about a year. And this is the last painting that I made in this body of work. And at this moment, I was able to go to a artist residency my junior year. Are you all familiar with what those are? No? So an artist residency is essentially an institution or a school, a museum, or just a place like a foundation that provides resources for you to basically go there and just focus on making work. Like their primary objective is to give you resources, a studio, a place to live, food, and you just go and make art for anywhere from 2 weeks to a year. And we're gonna pay for you to just like do that, okay? So be thinking about those also as you're leaving. But this program changed my life. It's called Yale Norfolk. So it's up in Connecticut, and there are like 26 other students there from around the country. It was the first time that I started to understand that the work that I was making was part of a discourse. It was part of a larger conversation. The things that I was interested in focusing on were movements that were happening. And it was also the first time that I got like really intense critique. Like it was like people were really going at it. It was kind of like a mini grad school a bit. And one of the primary like things that came out of that program was that I started to understand that like these people that I was painting, though they were like people that I knew, I was kind of using them as like proxies for my own negotiation of working in this canon of painting, and how I wanted to be like represented or seen. And so I came away from that program back to my senior year, and it's like, I'm going to like start over. It's like, I took the photo reference out, I was taking pictures and just using stuff around the studio to compose these, and then through the painting process, I would kind of break down the image. And so then I moved on, and when I got back, I decided like, I'm gonna apply to grad school and make a portfolio in 4 months. It was awful. I was in the studio for like literally like 20 hours a day for like 4 months, basically starting over. But that kind of like accelerated timeline and pressure, it yields like pretty big results. And one thing I'll say is like things can happen really, really fast for you as a developing artist, career-wise, but also just like your brain getting bigger, your skills getting sharper. When you have these like big pushes where you just really focus. And I remember I applied to grad school. I applied to Skowhegan, which is a very important artist residency. And I applied to a painting publication called New American Paintings. And I found out that I got all 3 of those things in like the same week. And they all changed my life. And I like literally live off of those, like every domino that's fallen since then, where I have teaching jobs, exhibitions, has all come from like 21-year-old baby Alex in the studio, just like grinding really hard. So when I say like, now is the time, like I mean it. So one of the primary like spaces that I started from when I got back was like, okay, well, everybody's talking about I'm negotiating myself through these other people. Let's like come back to me. So I started dealing with narrative for the first time. I started thinking about what invention means, what it means to like fabulate and think about a place that is not here as opposed to direct observation. and what I would want that space to look like. So this is my graduate school application I'm showing you. I didn't skip anything. Okay. You're hopping around this button. Can you tap for me? Thank you. Okay. These are about 4 by 6. This is like 4 by 6 feet. I'm gonna scoot over here a little bit. And those black pools that you see up there are, it's like oil paint mixed with polyurethane. I was pouring onto the paintings afterwards. And I also started to, everything was coming out of drawing and from the imagination at this point. And I was looking at a lot of Indian miniature painting and thinking about how they constructed space out of pattern and color blocks. And so for a moment, just this painting ended up on the cover of that publication. And another anecdote about that is that, the gallery that I work with now owns this, the gallerist that I work with now owns this painting. And is just another example of how you can be working on something that no one knows you're working on, and then all of a sudden you put it out into the world and things start coming back to you, and only you know they exist until you share them. And that's to say, like, you'll be asked to apply to things, you'll be asked to put your work out there at varying speeds, varying degrees, at different times. But what's most critical is that you put it out at the right time. So it doesn't mean that you need to be like always applying to things and always on the hustle. It means like stay inside, cook, and think about when it's the right time to like strike. And don't feel, because applying to things can be like a full-time job. Like it's a lot of work. And if it doesn't feel like it's like the most productive time, like it's okay to step back and wait a little bit. This is a brush I made out of my hair. It's quite big. It's like a couple of feet long. So one of the primary, there's a scholar, oh, go ahead.
How many hours do you think it took for a lot of the 4 by 6 pieces?
Ooh, sorry. That's the answer.
When I paint or anything, just like small scale. So thinking about like 4 by 6 or 6 by 7, like huge pieces, it seems to take a lot longer to get like the level of detail.
Sure.
For a lot of the faces that you had too, like good detail on the nose. And stuff like that.
It depends on how much preparation is there, like, and how lost I feel when I start something. I always say, like, I typically, now it's like I always know one thing about the painting when I started. I have smaller paintings that I'll get to later that have taken me 2 years to make. And some of the bigger paintings can come like really fast. So I was like touching these paintings like over the course of like 3 or 4 months. So I work on a lot of things at the same time. Yeah. One of the central, like, there's an important scholar named Saidiya Hartman who has this term called critical fabulation, which is essentially like she talks about the archive. This is a scholar who's primarily working in the like 19th century, 18th century, dealing with the history of slavery, talking about like, when you're approaching these materials in the archive, there's only a certain amount of information that can be like taken from them as truth, right? That there's like a moment, or that there's information that needs to be like critically thought about in terms and invented and almost fictionalized in order to like really try to understand what the archive leaves out. And that's been a, like, you know, I would say like a way of thinking that's been important for me even before I even knew what that was. And one of the primary like sources, I guess, during this body of work was thinking about Roots, which was a TV miniseries from the early 70s that I think it was the first TV miniseries actually to deal with like the legacy of slavery in a, like on national television. So I was using that text as like a way to like ground myself and then also think about what invention looked like in that space. This is a headstone. I remade a prop from the show. That's what this is. Okay, so that's the end of my undergraduate work. And then I go to this amazing residency in the summer called Skowhegan. It's like art camp for adults. It's like 65 artists in the woods in Maine, just making art or not, a lot of not making art actually. And I didn't make that much there, but one of the most important things that came out of that space is I really started to think about what it would mean for me to be my own author. So I started writing this book that I'm still working on. It's changed a million times. The form's changed. The structure, the ideas have shifted. But here's some of the work that I made in my first semester of grad school. And someone will probably ask me, what was Yale like? It was bad. It was not fun. It was good in a lot of ways, but also just a very, very competitive environment, which doesn't yield for a great camaraderie or anything else. Let's go to the back and then on. Yeah.
I was going to ask, so how did you cope with that, being in such a competitive environment and kind of feeling like you want to compare yourself to the others, but it's obviously, you try to avoid that as well. How do you find that balance? Sure,
that's a good question.
Can you repeat that question?
Oh yeah, like how did I cope with being in such a competitive environment? The back door was amazing. I think most of it was like staying out of the bureaucratic and political kind of nonsense that was happening in the department itself, because a lot of it was stemming from that. But you find your people, and you only need one person. Like every place that I've gone, I've always had like one person that's like been really important friendship. And also like, I like being competitive. It wasn't the competitive part that was, it was like the selfishness that came out of that, And so I think it's just about understanding where in the institution you can get your needs met. And for me, a lot of that was like conversations that weren't happening in the art department. I could go to art history and have those conversations that I needed. So it's really just about like finding your space, I think. You had a question, Michael?
I have two questions, Alex. The first is, how do you determine, or what process do you use to determine which of your pieces you're going to show?
Mm-hmm.
You put it all out there, or
no?
You get input, and then my second question is, you talked about how much time you spend in the studio and how important that is. How do you keep from burning out?
Okay, great questions. I keep a really tight lid on my studio. Like if something's not ready to leave the studio, it doesn't leave. And that means like if the shipper is coming the next day and the painting's not ready, tough shit. Like it just stays in the studio. Like, and you have luckily strong and honest relationships with folks that allow you to do that. Like I have really close relationships with the people that I work with. I try to, cultivate that. And burnout-wise, I'm still learning how to do that. I think I definitely hit a wall. I'll talk about that later, actually. I'll get there. Yeah. These are some small paintings. This is an important painting for me because I realized that like, this is at the end of my first semester of school. I started to understand that like the things that I was working against socially, politically, historically, they weren't things that were exterior to me. They were like part of me. They were things that needed to be like exercised and worked through. And I started to understand the imagination not as this like escape realm or a place where everything was like fine, but it was actually a place where like these histories were like very present in them, and that they could like penetrate my imagination. So a lot of the work, you know, one of the like grounding ethos about the work is like, how do you cultivate a space of freedom in the work that's built on inventing a liberatory ethic that doesn't reproduce the same systems of violence that you're like working against. And part of that is understanding that we're all complicit in that. It's not negotiating some individual relationship that says like, I know what's best here, and then everything is exterior. It's actually like, we're part of that system. And I think that's an important thing that I'll continue to talk about tonight. But this painting helped me like understand that. And these darker paintings, it's kind of funny to show them on screens because I'll stop on this one for a second. They're meant to be, they're trying to work against the screen, basically. You know, I felt like there was so much digital input, and we're like looking at a lot of work on screens and feeling like we actually saw them. And it's like, you didn't see that painting, you saw a photo of it. And so I started to make work, one that was about like undoing this kind of fast relationship that the institution had to like knowledge production, which was the critique space. It was like, so how do you slow down the act of looking? How do you slow down the act of understanding something and put forward uncertainty, right? Like, so these paintings, when you entered the room with them, your eyes had to adjust to them. They kind of demanded a different speed. And they're built out of many, many layers of transparent color. And so it's not like, so the blackness that happens in them isn't something that is arrived at like here and then put on the painting. It's a process of emergence, depending. And there's all kinds of information. They start really bright and then they slowly kind of degrade. And another like important point about these is that I started to think about blackness as not as a site of negation, but as a site of presence. And that is something in color theory, but also socially, that I was like rhetorically working with in the work, to really think about like this site as absence, because when people were reading these paintings, they kept saying there's nothing there. But there's so much there to talk about. Here's a detail. Oh, this painting is 12 by 16 feet. I made it this is the biggest painting I could make in my studio at the time in grad school. Work to the limits of your space, like as you have it, because you don't know when you're gonna have that space again. But don't use a lot of Egyptian violet and try to move it down a hallway with stairs and it's unstretched. Egyptian violet never dries.
Where's this piece now?
Rolled up in my studio somewhere. Come on. Here's a detail. And I would say also that these are like paintings that teach me, you know, I was engaged with a lot of critical theory at the time, was over in the art history department, And these are like some of the first paintings that taught me how to like make conceptual decisions in painting that weren't based in metaphor or narrative, but to really think about like the materiality of the painting itself as being a way that information gets put into the surface. So like everything like transparency, what does that mean poetically? What does like disillusion mean? What does a collapsed field of vision mean? Like all of these technical things start to get baked into the ideas. Okay, so then I'm gonna talk for a second and then kind of move through a lot of images to get through some things. But this is a moment where the text that I've been writing for, I guess it's like 11 years now, it never ends, started to emerge. So it began with the story of E, who's this man who swallows a star and implodes and turns into a black hole that becomes this place. And in this place, he discovers light and color in the form of this structure in a cave. And it implodes for a second time and becomes a like polychromatic phantom that is surrounded by, and all these other kind of creatures come into being that result from basically atoms being redistributed. And things kind of recombine with one another. Figures get melded into rock, into flora, fauna, color, light, to really take all those things and think about them democratically as equal information. And the story gets, more and more specific, but I'll save that for when we get there. So that was just like where I started with the images. All of the images came out of thinking through those things, and I built the kind of metaphors in the writing to happen formally in the work, right? So if like a color showed up in the work, it had a specific tie to the narrative itself. So I kind of wrote form into the structure of the story so that when I was writing and narrating the story, I was also thinking about painting itself and the histories that come with that. This is an important body of drawings I made at a residency in Scotland between my first and second year of grad school. And there are a lot of strange conversations and things that I was navigating in that space, charged space, lots of like difficult conversations being had about history, about identity, and the work always felt like it was being like pushed into a specific narrative. Like people expected me to make a certain thing, and then they would read it in a certain way, even like despite my best efforts to like thwart those projective gazes onto the work. And at this moment, I started to think about like, okay, well, I'm doing so much work of anticipating the restrictions that the work is being placed in. What would it mean to like operate from a space of like actual like freedom? Like what would it mean to like think about if I was like on an island, what would it mean to like really build something as opposed to react to something? And this shift from reacting to responding marks are like a really key difference, because it's easy to make work that's negating something. It's harder to make work that stands for what you're actually for and like build on that. And that's really, really important work. It's a practice. We use the word practice a lot, but it's called practice for a reason, because you have to like show up and do the work over and over again. So these drawings were a moment of me coming back to that space. I'm going to zoom through some things here. This is my thesis work, grad school thesis work. Also, awful time. Oh my gosh, I made these paintings in like a month. This painting's like 4.5 by 6 feet. This painting is like 3 by 4 feet. This is a mess. This painting's a mess. This is like 10 by 12 feet. I'm glad I made it, but yikes. This painting's 5 by 7 feet. This is kind of one of the first paintings I made that was actually dealing with a real person in a long time. This is based on a figure known as Corla Pandit, who had a television musical program in the 50s, where he would like stare directly into the camera and play music on an organ for like 600 episodes, never said a word. But he had built this persona as a Indian man who trained in London and came to the U.S. and started this program. But he was actually a black man from Missouri who was escaping Jim Crow, and he used the turban to like reinvent his identity. So I found him really, really fascinating. Okay, so I'm out of school, and I will say, like, always follow what the work is asking of you, what it needs. A few of the friends that I had in school, a lot of people ran off to big cities to pursue opportunities. They ran off to New York, and we just stayed where we were in New Haven and got a studio that was like, each of us were paying like $180 a month. It's a big warehouse space, and we just kept going. We just kept making work. And so at a certain point, like, you kind of have to make decisions about like what's going to allow you to continue to practice, and what's going to be a distraction, and what's going to be what's going to take like all of your creative energy or time. Doesn't mean that we didn't have to work. Doesn't mean that money wasn't still hard, but we were able to like still continue to just show up and do our thing. We had a space to go do that. I did my first art fair, which was weird, actually in Miami. Very strange places if you've ever been to an art fair. All these amazing things in such a shallow space. But I made this painting kind of like, it's like, well, what if I set up my own marketplace in this booth that I have paintings in? Another thing that you'll kind of come across is that there are things that one of the most difficult parts about being in school is that you're trying to name things while you do them. And that's almost like an impossible way to work. And so you have to find ways, it's just like a hard thing to just deal with. But there were always these things that I feel like I don't have the skills to be able to do this yet. And one of those things was like composition. I always felt like this like thing that everybody kind of talked about, but no one really teaches composition. It's kind of this weird thing that we just kind of say like, oh, that's good, that's bad. And there's no like, I never was taught it formally. And then I started to understand like, part of my hiccup or hesitation with it was that I was trying to justify my decisions before I was making them. And so after school, I was like started making these drawings where I just like sat down with a matrix of the same size sheet of paper and just like tried to make one drawing after the other that was different from the last one. And it taught me a lot about like, one, freedom, but also like that making objects is a practice of listening. Like the objects will tell you what they need to be. And it's your like job is to be a receptacle and take in the information that the object gives you and respond to it. Not yell at it all the time and tell it what to do. So these are like 9 by 12 inches. And part of that is like, you know, meaning is excavated from the work. It's not something that we like invent or put on the work. Anything can be interesting. Like this floor is an idea, right? This cup is. You can make a painting about that, and it's about how you deal with the information, not about what is inside of it. So you're finding what things mean, and it's important to ask equally about what things mean as it is what they do. And so I started asking myself, okay, what would this decision do to the experience of looking at this object on the wall? Not what does it mean to put this thing here? How does it change the object itself? How does it change the experience of it? Okay. So this is like a return to painting. I'll say that there are like phases that you'll go through where you're like, you have your different processes, you have a different kind of brain, like drawing requires a different headspace than painting does. And so it's okay to like compartmentalize things. Don't feel like you need to like approach the entirety of an object all at once. Like sometimes the problem is just couched in color, or it might just be couched in composition or touch or materials or scale. And so I would like, after I finished the body work, I'd be like, okay, what's the weakest like thing that I feel like I'm dealing with? And let me just like hammer my skills on that. So I was like, I kind of treat being in the studio like I'm running a marathon. Like I train for paintings. And just like, there are things that you can do every day that just like help you understand. Because it's not like, there's no mystery. I mean, there's a lot of mystery to making objects, but like the way that things function, like there's a reason why they do what they do. It's just about learning, like understanding them, and giving yourself the information to understand what actions need to be taken to solve a particular problem. So you can see after all that drawing, the kind of index correlationship to the mark making starts to appear, meaning like the one-to-one relationship between the tool and the mark that it makes gets to stay, which I feel like that's like a no-brainer in drawing land, where you're like, yeah, like the pencil's line is like the pencil's line. You don't really second guess that, but with painting, it's like such a pain in the ass that there's like so many decisions you have to think about. But I just kind of started to think about what a drawing touch looked like in the paintings. These are all from a show I had in LA, 2018. Oh, hey.
Do you often show drawings with your paintings as a kind of way of performing some of those processes? Or, I mean, I imagine you wouldn't at an art fair, but at an exhibition like this, it seems to be like it's easier to kind of understand what you were just sort of saying about how the marks of drawing are influencing the painting. So something I think about a lot, doing what we do, about showing some of that other kind of hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to think about drawing as if it was like only a means to get to a painting, and then I started to understand like drawing is actually like everything. Like if any of you are like not drawing, please, like it'll solve all your problems. Make sure that it's like you're really rooted in that. But I think that they offer a space for me to draw relationships for sure, but also to do a little bit of like context building and also a bit of narration, I think, in the way that the paintings. I think that there's like a speed at which and a rhythm that they read at, that the paintings kind of like are much more about experience. And I kind of think sometimes about the drawing as like maybe like a typography in the work or punctuation. Does that answer your question? Okay. Here's Korla again. I make a few paintings about him here and there. Okay, so then, I feel like so many of the like failings in the paintings, it's like usually about time pressure, right? It's like you're like operating on the work is demanding a different speed than like school or the market or whatever is demanding from you. And so how do you start to like work on your own time? And I think this painting, it's like I started to like embrace that ethos where I was saying like if something's not ready, it doesn't leave, because I just got sick of seeing things that I was like, oh my God. Like I cringe at seeing that thing out in the world. I wish I could change it. And really just like working a little bit less with like these big swings of time where it's like do nothing for a long time and then do a lot. But just trying to think about what it means to like show up routinely every day and like really hone and sharpen and make critical decisions in the work. So between that last painting and this one, I took a break from painting and just made a lot of drawings where I just give myself one tool and a piece of paper, a marker, no color. I feel like I was relying on color too much in the work. It's like, okay, well, what would it mean to like just have one unit, which is just line to work with? So sometimes limitations can be really useful because they force you to have an intimate relationship with the thing at hand. Like sometimes just reducing things down to like one tool or one unit of description actually allows you to understand that one thing better. And I didn't realize that all those drawings were going to turn into these paintings. I call these sea gates. I kind of think about them as portals into this place. They're exhausting to make. It take months. I mean, everything kind of takes months for me, but these are early ones. These are where they start to kind of make sense. Here's some prints. I have some more prints later that we'll talk about. This painting is probably one of the most important paintings I've made. It's called Color Theory for Ghosts, which I finally started to like build a language around the way that I thought about color. This is also like the painting where I arrived at, well, the title is the title of the book now. I made this painting in 2021. But all it had was that like strange green spotlight and then that little sliver of orange on the top. And that completely changed the way that I thought about what lighting and shadow meant in the work. And started thinking about like, well, what would it mean to like occupy the life of a shadow? And that there's like a relationship between the shadow that an object casts and the shadow itself, and that it could have its own identity from that thing. That becomes a kind of like poetic underpinning of a lot of the decisions I make in the work. Small painting, 9 by 12 inches. These are all from the show in New York that I had in 2021. very important paintings. This is where I burn out. Like after this show, there's a figure in that painting. You can kind of see it on the other screens back there. But here's a drawing for that image. This is E. This painting felt like everything that I was like working towards. All the skills, all the like reading, everything. It was like kind of culminated in this painting. And after I made this painting, I was like done painting for a couple years. Like I took a big break, felt really like confused, lost, and needed to like step outside of the work. You know, you can't really control the way that ideas come to you. Like you'll get an idea for something that doesn't fit within the narrative that you've created for yourself about who you are and what you do, which is a myth anyways. Like any singular notion about who you are and what you do is like completely a result of like branding and it's unnecessary. That's not how like creative thinking works, right? So to really like embrace your multiplicity and really to like give yourself over to like the ideas that come to you, because you know, an unmaterialized idea is like almost worth nothing, right? Like you have to make it into something. And what the work was asking from me was to like leave this alone. I felt like I resolved something. It's like, okay, I think that like all these concerns that I had, I thought I was gonna be like thinking about forever. I'm done with them. Like I need to put them away and step away. So I did that. Oh, here's some install shots for the show. There's a lot that I'm not saying about the narrative because I need to move on, but I'm around. So I made these paintings for a while because there were things that like the structure and the parameters that were there were like things that I knew I could just like give myself over to and didn't have to like, I knew I could iterate within them. So the matrix is really useful for that. Didn't have to reinvent the wheel. Oh, there's some process photos. You'll see me ruin them and then have to bring them back. These paintings are all about, you know, convergence. Some of the things that I've spoken about already. It's like, how do you think about a singular point as being you know, the result of many, many contingencies coming together, stacking systems on top of one another. Ruined. These are some from like last year. I think I just made like the last one a few months ago. So I spoke a little bit about stepping outside of, you know, things. How are we doing on time? Am I okay? Is everyone any, okay. Seeing some heavy lids out there. You know, needing to let the narrative go for a little bit. And I started getting these ideas that were very present. I spent so much time like thinking about like imagined spaces and thinking about the future, thinking about a space that is like free from a lot of things, but I'm like still in a body, still moving through the world. And I made this show. I was doing a lot of traveling. I made this show about like being at the airport. I made a fictional airline called Daedalus Airways. So I kind of tied in the myth of Daedalus and the Minotaur and Theseus and Icarus, and made this little show in Philly. And when I said earlier about folks that are around you, you don't really know where you're going to end up. This show ended up being with someone I met my freshman year of college. She opened a gallery. She lives in Philly, and it's like one of the last people I thought like I'm gonna like raise kids with this person, and I'm not married to this person, but like we're like part of a little family in Philly now. And she opened a gallery, and I had a show there. And I would have never made this work if she didn't offer me that spot. See, these are drawings. And part of my hesitation making this, like I have a list of things that are like, oh, that'd be an interesting painting, but they don't fit into this thing that I made, is I just had to get over the fear of, like, how do I frame these things now? That I have a career, I have people who are, understand me to be making a certain thing. You just gotta let it all go. I think that's probably like one of the most, sometimes you have these shifts that are not about like, they don't materialize in the work, but they're like huge mental shifts. And sometimes like that's all you have at the end of a body of work or a stretch of time. Yeah.
What are you using to create that?
I'm sorry, the spotted?
The speckled texture, like in the space.
Oh yeah, a roller, like a sponge roller. I kind of came back to, so there's kind of like a full circle moment, like that earlier work, but I had like eliminated gesture for so long. I was like, no gesture, everything's about certain kind of precision. I want every, brush mark to look like a decision as opposed to an expression. And then I would kind of return back to like a rougher way of working, more immediate way of working, but I also reconceptualized gesture in my head. I used to think of the gestural as stopping early or a reduction in information. And I had to kind of rethink it as the amplification of an immaterial information, right? So it's like you arrive at something quicker because you're getting to the heart of it immediately. It's not about reducing things. So I made these small paintings that are kind of like my introduction back into photo painting. I started with myself, so self-portrait in the studio. I did a lot of looking out the window for 3 years. So these are small paintings. This is like 8 by 2 inches. And this is the last painting. That's also that's my studio burning down. But I like thinking about what's going to happen on the right side of this image. This is the last thing I made, and this is where I'll end the talk. Thanks.